Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to my video discussion assignment for this week. Today I'm going to tackle some pretty massive ideas from our organizational behavior units, specifically looking at how people think, how we perceive each other, how we get motivated, and how entire workplace cultures are shaped by the people at the top. I chose to combine a few major topics for this video because when you really look at them, they all connect. We're going to talk about the psychological tricks our brains play on us when we get a new boss, how to stop ourselves from totally misjudging our coworkers when a project gets stressful, different ways managers can actually reward their employees besides just saying good job, and finally we're going to look at a really toxic case study to see how bad leadership can completely ruin a company using some famous psychological theories. Now I know some of these terms can sound a little bit like textbook jargon, but my goal today is to break them down into plain everyday English for us. These aren't just corporate concepts. You see this stuff playing out everywhere in life. You see it at a corporate office, you see it during a shift at a retail store or a fast food joint. And honestly, you see a lot of it happening right in your own classroom or in a group project. To make sure I cover everything thoroughly and hit the requirement for this assignment, I'm going to walk through each question step by step. So let's dive right into the first section, which is all about how we perceive our leaders from the moment they walk through the door. Let's set the scene a little bit. Imagine you've been working at a job for about a year. You know the routines, you know the people, and then suddenly your old boss leaves and a brand new manager is brought in to take over the department that you work for. On day one, before that new manager even opens their mouth to speak, a bunch of psychological traps snap shut in the minds of the employees. We don't see this new person objectively. Instead, we view them through what psychologists call perceptual distortions. Basically, these are mental filters or shortcuts that our brains can use to make sense of a new situation quickly, but they do usually cause us to misjudge people. Based on everything I've read, I will argue that the top 3 mental traps employees fall into when meeting a new boss are, of course, stereotyping. There's the halo or horn effect, and then projection. Let me break these down and explain why these are the most common and also the most dangerous. The first major trap is stereotyping. We all know what stereotyping is in general, but at work it happens because our brains are desperate for a quick answer to a scary question, which is whether this new person is going to make our lives miserable. To answer that, without actually doing the hard work of getting to know the person, we just shove them into a box based on what group they belong to. For example, let's say the new manager walking in is pretty young, maybe in their late 20s. Instantly, the older employees who have been at the company for 15 years might look at this person and think, wow, this kid has 0 real world experience, and that they're probably just going to try to change everything using new technology and that they won't respect the traditions of our team. Or you can flip it around. Imagine the new manager comes in from a massive corporate tech background, wears a sharp suit. The creative team might immediately stereotype this person as cold, ruthless, maybe a number cruncher who only cares about data and doesn't have a single creative bone in their body. Stereotyping is the absolute fastest mental shortcut we take. And it's a massive barrier because it forces a new manager to climb out of a reputational hole that they didn't even dig for themselves. They really didn't even get a chance. The second major distortion is called the halo or horn effect. This is actually a fascinating bit of psychology, in my opinion. It happens when we take one single isolated trait or action that a person does and we let it color our entire opinion of them. Let's look at the halo side first. Imagine your new manager walks in on Monday morning, brings in a couple boxes of expensive, yummy donuts, smiles warmly at everyone, is very friendly, then gives a super inspiring speech about how they want to support the team. Because of that one great interaction, the employees then put a shining halo over this manager's head. They instantly assume that this person is incredibly nice, which means they also must be an organized person, a fair negotiator, and they probably do really well under pressure. You just see the best in them. The danger here is that if the manager makes a massive strategic mistake, maybe a month later, the team will ignore it or make excuses for them because they're still blinded by that initial halo or that gesture of friendliness. But their horn sign is even more powerful and way harder to fix. Let's say the new manager's very first action on day one isn't bringing donuts. Instead, they send a company-wide email saying that starting today, they are strictly monitoring the clock and times, and if you are even 2 minutes late, it's a warning, a formal warning. Exactly. Just like that, the team instantly gives them horns. They decide this manager is ruthless, he's a micromanaging dictator. Once that horn effect is locked in, the manager is basically doomed for the next few months. If they try to buy the team next lunch to be nice, the employees won't think it's a kind gesture. They will just filter it through the horns and think that it's a trap or some sort of manipulation tactic, or that the boss is just trying to soften them up before they fire someone. One single action can create a permanent filter that is almost impossible to change. The third distortion is projection. I think this is the most insidious because it happens entirely in your subconscious mind. Projection is when you unconsciously take your own internal fears, your own insecurities, or your own bad habits, and then you project them onto someone else. Meaning you assume they are the ones thinking it or doing it. Let's kind of put this in a workplace scenario. Say you have an employee named Mike. He's secretly insecure about his performance. Deep down, Mike knows he's been slacking off. He's terrified that he might get fired. When the new manager starts, the manager might just walk past Mike's desk quickly on their way to a meeting without saying hi or good morning. A normal observer would look at that and think the boss is just busy and running late for a meeting. But because of his own insecurities and projection, Mike will then project his own fear of being fired onto the new boss. He thinks that the boss purposely avoided him because they're actively plotting to replace him. Mike genuinely believes he is being a realistic, sharp observer of this new boss, but in reality, he's just looking at a mirror of his own anxiety and insecurities. We have to list projection as a top 3 distortion because it turns the employee into a mind reader who constantly misinterprets neutral corporate actions as personal attacks. When you combine stereotyping, the halo or horn effect, and projection, you realize that a new manager isn't just managing a team, they're managing a house of mirrors made up of everyone's mental traps. Now that we've talked about how we misjudge our bosses, let's pivot to the next question, which focuses on how we misjudge our peers, especially when the pressure gets turned up. To understand this, we have to look at a famous cognitive bias called the fundamental attribution error. By definition, the fundamental attribution error is our baseline tendency to blame other people's failures on their own internal character or personality while completely ignoring the external situation that they were actually dealing with. But here's the catch. When we mess up, we do the exact opposite. We blame our own failures entirely on the situation while keeping our character clean. Let me give you a clear, realistic example that I think everyone could relate to. Imagine you're working on a massive, high-stakes project at work or school. There's 4 of you on the team, and you're up against a brutal midnight deadline. One of your teammates, let's call her Sarah, is supposed to send you her section of the report by 5 o'clock in the afternoon so you can compile everything together. 5 o'clock comes and goes. You get no email. 6 o'clock passes. Still nothing. By 7 o'clock, still silent. What's your immediate reaction? Thanks to the fundamental attribution error, your brain immediately attacks her character. You think Sarah's so lazy, that she's irresponsible, 0 work ethic, that she doesn't care about this team or the grade. You put the blame entirely on her personality. But then let's flip the script. Imagine that the very next week you are the one who misses the deadline for a different project. Do you sit there and think that you missed the deadline because you're lazy or irresponsible, or you have no work ethic? No, you don't. You look outward at the situation. You say that your home Wi-Fi completely cut out, your laptop had to do a random 2-hour system update. And honestly, your other teachers gave you way too much homework this week, so it's not your fault. We demand that the world looks at our circumstances, but we refuse to look at the circumstances of others when they make a mistake. And that is the fundamental attribution error in action. So, yeah, if you're in a high-stress work situation, want to protect yourself from falling into that trap so you don't ruin your working relationships, you could use a quick strategy. First, you need to implement a strict cooling off. Take a pause. When someone does blow a deadline or messes up a project, don't say anything or send an angry email right away. Just let your brain cool down. The second thing you could do is to run an external factor audit. You could force your brain to list at 3 realistic outside reasons why that person may have failed or didn't make the deadline. And, writing down these external variables can help balance your brain out. The third thing you could try doing is try changing how you talk to them. Instead of accusing them, saying, why is your part late? Try a question that focuses entirely on the situation. Say something like, hey, Sarah, I noticed the file didn't come through yesterday afternoon. I know we're under a lot of pressure right now, so did you run into any glitches or roadblocks that I can help clear you out? Give them some assistance. Be supportive. When you communicate with curiosity instead of accusation, you can find out the actual truth, and you also build trust in that process. Now let's move on to the third question, which looks at how motivation can actually encourage good work. In organizational psychology, we talk a lot about the reinforcement theory, which basically says that behavior is shaped by its consequences. If a behavior is followed by a good consequence, which is a positive reinforcement, that behavior is much more likely to happen again in the future. A lot of people think positive reinforcement just means a manager saying good job, sending a nice email, or giving a quick shout out in the team meeting. And don't get me wrong, praise is an awesome tool. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it makes people feel good. But a really smart manager knows that if you only use verbal praise, it eventually starts to feel cheap or repetitive. You need a wider toolkit of rewards to help keep a workforce truly motivated over the long haul. The first one is, or the first thing that managers could do to add on to positive reinforcements could be task autonomy and job enrichment. This means rewarding employees' high performance and reliability by giving them more freedom over their work life. If a manager sees that you consistently hit your marks, do flawless work, their reward to you isn't just a pat on the back. It's stepping back and stopping the micromanagement. They let you set your own daily schedule, choose which projects you want to tackle next, or decide how you want to execute a goal. It is a massive psychological reward because it tells the employee that their competence has earned them independence. The second thing that could be used as a positive reinforcement is a professional development or a future investment in the employee. This is when a company can reinforce your great work by actively investing in your long-term career capital. Instead of just giving you a generic compliment, they can offer to pay for you to attend a massive national industry conference, or they pay out of pocket for you to take a certification course that could help you get a promotion. This reinforces good behavior by telling the employee that the company sees their potential. The third strategy is material perks and schedule flexibility. This is the concrete, tangible stuff that directly improves an employee's quality of life. It includes unexpected spot bonuses, giving an employee a random extra day of paid time off after they survived a brutal month of overtime, or allowing them to work completely from home for a couple of weeks after finishing a massive project. The question also asks, out of all these reinforcements, which one I find personally motivating and why? Out of all of them, the one that motivates me the most is definitely, getting that extra time off, that extra day off, or, allowing me to work from home. That is a huge reward to me. I want to work hard for something and then get an actual tangible reward back. That is super important to me. And then for the final section of this discussion, I just want to explore the scenario regarding a highly toxic corporate culture. I just want you to imagine that you just joined a brand new company. Within your first week, you realize the environment's completely dysfunctional. You notice that the managers here regularly scream and reprimand their reports right in front of the entire office. You see that they play favorites very obviously, promoting people who don't deserve it just because they're friends. On top of that, management actively encourages coworkers to spy on one another, keep logs, snitch on each other for little mistakes. To map out what kind of culture is going to grow from this nightmare, we have to look through the lens of Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. Bandura's theory revolves around a concept called triadic reciprocal determinism. This sounds like a mouth-filling academic phrase. It was hard for me to even say, but it's actually pretty simple. It just means that three things are constantly throwing a ball back and forth, influence each other in a continuous loop: the environment, the person's internal thoughts and mindset, and the actual person's behavior. Another huge pillar of Bandura's theory is observational learning. Human beings don't learn how to act in a new environment just by reading a handbook. We learn by watching models. And in a company, the ultimate models are the bosses. Employees watch leaders. They see what kind of behavior gets rewarded. They see what kind of behaviors get punished, and their internal mindset can change, which completely changes how they behave. As we all move into our future careers and assume leadership roles in our respective industries, we need to challenge ourselves as young professionals to be fiercely aware of our own cognitive biases. We need to be intentional with how we reinforce our teams and deeply protective of building ethical, safe workplace cultures where people actually want to show up and do great work every single day. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention.